There is a certain kind of person who wakes up at 5 a.m., not because they love the morning, but because they need to. Not need, the way you need water. Need, the way you need to pay a debt. They lace up their shoes in the dark. They push through the workout even when their body is screaming. They count calories with the precision of someone managing a financial crisis. And when they miss a day, when life intervenes, when the body gives out, when exhaustion finally wins, the punishment begins. Not from a coach, not from a doctor, from themselves. They call it discipline. They call it dedication. They post about it online and people admire them for it. But underneath the language of strength and commitment, something else is happening. Something quieter. Something most people never say out loud. They are not building themselves up. They are paying for something. This video is about what that something is.
Let's start with what this actually looks like, because it's more common than we admit, and more normalized than it should be. Overtraining is the obvious one. Working out twice a day. Running on an injury because stopping feels like failure. Adding more weight, more reps, more sessions. Not because the goal demands it, but because rest feels like weakness. The body sends signals: fatigue, persistent soreness, declining performance, disrupted sleep, and they get ignored, pushed through, overridden by sheer willpower. Then there's restriction. Cutting calories beyond what any reasonable program requires. Punishing a bad meal with a harder workout the next day. Building elaborate systems of what you're allowed to eat and when. Not based on nutrition science, but based on a moral framework where certain foods are sins and certain choices are failures. And then there's the subtler version, the one that doesn't look extreme from the outside.
The person who exercises compulsively, not because they enjoy it, but because not exercising produces anxiety, so overwhelming it feels unbearable. The person who can't take a rest day without spiraling, who sits with discomfort every time they skip a session. Not physical discomfort, emotional discomfort, the feeling that they haven't earned their day. This is the version most people don't talk about, because it looks like discipline from the outside. It photographs well. It gets likes. But it is exhausting in a way that has nothing to do with the workout. Here is what research actually tells us about this pattern. Compulsive exercise and restrictive eating are not about fitness. They are about control. They are about worthiness. And most importantly, they are about shame. When we understand that, when we trace the behavior back to its actual root, the picture changes entirely. Psychologists have a term for this pattern: exercise dependence.
But I think that term misses something important. Dependence implies the thing you're dependent on brings you relief. And for many people caught in this cycle, the exercise itself is not the relief. The relief is the punishment. Let me explain what I mean by that. Shame is one of the most powerful and least understood forces in human psychology. Unlike guilt, which says, I did something bad, shame says, I am something bad. Guilt is about behavior. Shame is about identity. When we feel shame, we don't just want to fix what we did. We want to fix what we are. And because shame lives in the body, it's felt physically, as heat, as contraction, as the urge to disappear. We look for ways to discharge it physically. For a lot of people, that discharge looks like punishment. The logic, operating beneath conscious awareness, goes something like this. If I work hard enough, if I restrict enough, if I push through enough pain, I will have suffered sufficiently. I will have paid the debt. I will have earned the right to take up space. This is not a rational calculation, but it is a deeply human one. Research in behavioral psychology shows that self-punishment activates the same reward circuitry as external validation. When you punish yourself before someone else can, when you discipline yourself before the world has a chance to judge you, there is a brief sensation of control, of agency, of being ahead of the shame rather than swallowed by it. The body becomes the arena where this negotiation happens, because the body is something you can control in a world where most things cannot be controlled. This is why it's so seductive, and this is why it's so hard to stop. Nobody is born believing their body is something to be punished. So how does that belief take root? The answer varies from person to person, but the patterns are consistent enough that we can name them. The first pattern is conditional worth. Growing up in an environment where love, approval, or belonging was conditional on performance, on achieving, on looking a certain way, on not taking up too much space, physically, emotionally, energetically. Children raised in these environments learn a fundamental lesson early. You are not enough as you are. You have to earn it. That lesson doesn't disappear when childhood ends. It moves underground. And it resurfaces in adulthood as the relentless drive to do more, be more, restrict more. Because somewhere in the system, the belief is still running that enough is a destination you have to work toward. That rest is something you have to earn. The second pattern is trauma. And I want to be careful here, because trauma doesn't always look like the dramatic events we associate with that word. Sometimes it's chronic, subtle. Years of being told your body is wrong. Years of watching a parent wage war on their own body and absorbing that as normal.
Years of a culture that frames thinness as moral virtue and fat as personal failure. Trauma, in this context, creates a fractured relationship with the body. The body stops feeling like home. It starts feeling like a problem to be managed. And management, in the absence of healing, often looks like control. And control often looks like punishment. The third pattern is identity attachment. This one is more modern, and in some ways, more insidious. The fitness industry, and social media's amplification of it, has made the disciplined body a status symbol. The 5 a.m. wake-up, the calorie deficit, the relentless training, these have become markers of character, of moral superiority. When your identity becomes fused with your fitness habits, rest becomes an existential threat. Because if you stop, if you take the day off, if you eat the thing, if you miss the workout, you are not just skipping a session. You are losing yourself. And that is terrifying in a way that has nothing to do with your body composition. Here is the cruelest irony of this entire pattern. The people caught in cycles of self-punishment through fitness are often described themselves as highly disciplined, strong-willed, committed. But discipline, in its truest sense, is not the ability to punish yourself into compliance. Discipline is the ability to act in alignment with what you actually value, including your own well-being. What we are calling discipline in these cases is something else. It is compulsion wearing the costume of virtue. The person who runs on a stress fracture is not demonstrating strength. They are demonstrating how afraid they are of what happens if they stop. The person who punishes a bad meal with 3 extra hours in the gym is not demonstrating dedication. They are showing us how deeply they believe that their worth is contingent on their behavior.
The language of fitness culture makes this confusion almost inevitable. Words like beast mode, no days off, earn your food. These are not metaphors about athletic performance. They are moral statements. They encode a philosophy of the body that says, suffering is the currency of worth. And when that philosophy gets internalized, when it stops being something you hear from a coach and starts being something you say to yourself in the mirror at 6 a.m., it becomes very difficult to separate from who you are. This is the trap. The punishment feels like purpose. The restriction feels like power. The compulsion feels like commitment. Until the body gives out, or the mind does. I want to pull back for a moment. Because everything we've talked about, the overtraining, the restriction, the compulsion, the shame, is downstream of a question that most people are never directly asked and rarely ask themselves. Do you believe you deserve to feel good in your body without earning it first? Not after the weight loss. Not after the PR. Not after the six-pack or the clean diet or the perfect week of training. Right now. As you are. For a lot of people, the honest answer is no. And that no is where all of this begins. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote about the human tendency to seek affliction, to pursue suffering not as a means to an end, but as a kind of proof. Proof of seriousness. Proof of worthiness, proof that we are not soft, not weak, not taking up space we haven't justified. We don't have to be philosophers to recognize this impulse in ourselves. We feel it every time we think, I haven't worked hard enough to rest, Every time we calculate whether we've earned a meal, every time we look in the mirror, and the first thought is a list of everything that needs to be fixed. The body becomes a project, permanent, endless, never quite finished. And we wonder why we're exhausted. I don't want to end this video with a 5-step recovery plan. That would miss the point.
Because the thing about self-punishment through fitness is that it doesn't respond to behavioral solutions. You can't out-discipline a shame spiral. You can't hack your way out of a worthiness wound. What changes is perception. When you see that your compulsive training is not a character strength, but a coping mechanism, everything shifts. Not because the behavior immediately stops, but because you can no longer be fully deceived by it. When you trace the restriction back to the belief that you have to earn your place, you start asking different questions. Not how do I train harder, but what am I afraid will happen if I stop? When you recognize that the punishment is not about the body, that the body is just the place you're staging a much older drama about worth and shame and belonging, you begin to understand that no amount of training will resolve it, because the wound isn't in your body.
It's in the story you were told about yourself before you were old enough to question it. The body is not a project, it is not a debt to be repaid, it is not proof of your worth or evidence of your failure, it is the place you live, and you are allowed to live there, not after the transformation, not once you've earned it, not when you finally look the way the culture tells you that you should. Now. As you are. Without conditions. That is not a soft idea. That is one of the most radical things a person can actually believe about themselves in a world that profits endlessly from their self-doubt. So the next time you find yourself adding one more session because you feel guilty, or skipping the rest day because rest feels like weakness, or calculating whether you've suffered enough to deserve something that should have always been yours. Pause. Not to stop you from being dedicated, not to take away your drive, but to ask, who taught you that this is what devotion looks like?
Because discipline that comes from love looks entirely different from discipline that comes from shame. One builds you, the other just keeps collecting. This has been the Pattern Break. If this video reached something in you, something you don't often talk about, share it with someone who might need to hear it too. And I'll see you in the next one.